Hi, welcome to Political Perspectives. I'm Cynthia Dickstein, your Political Perspectives host. Did you know that the U.S. has 5% of the world's population and 25% of the world's prison population? That the U.S. locks up its citizens at a rate more than 6 times that of other industrialized nations? And that the huge expansion of prison populations in the U.S. has nothing to do with the level of crime, which has, for the most part, been stable or in decline since the 1970s? Arizona has the second fastest growing prison population in America, second only to Montana, and that population is expected to increase by 35% in the next 5 years. 4,202 out of 36,490 prisoners in Arizona are now in private for-profit facilities, facilities that have no oversight or transparency. Private prisons across America are a growth industry, leaving many to argue that they are interested more in recidivism and stockholder profits than rehabilitation and reform. Join us today as we discuss private for-profit prisons. You may want to get pencil and paper because later in the show we will have websites and books to recommend. Now I'd like to introduce our guests. Caroline Isaacs, Program Director for Arizona Friends Servants Committee of Arizona. Ivan Bartos, an Operations Director for the Arizona Division of Corrections, Department of Corrections, and Katie Decker, Director of Media Relations, Arizona Department of Corrections. Welcome. It's great to have you with us. My research came up with the statistic that 8% of prisons in the United States are outsourced to private operators. Caroline, which prison population are they serving?
Well, it's a very selective population because these operators are in business to make a profit. They generally select for the cheapest prisoners to house, those who have few medical needs that would be costly, those who have clean disciplinary records, they're low security facilities, so it doesn't create a whole lot of overhead for them.
Mm-hmm. What about women?
That's an interesting question. In my research, it's rare for private facilities to house women exclusively. Generally, you see it in, say, immigrant detention centers or jails, which have a mixed population. But facilities exclusively for women tend to be more costly because women have higher health care needs.
Mm-hmm. I should add that we did invite representatives from Management and Training Corporation, which is a private facility that runs a prison in Marana.
That's right.
We did invite them to be on the show, and they said that it was their policy not to participate in television. But I wanted to ask you, Ivan, what is the state's relationship to the private prison industry?
Well, you know, we are in a position right now where we grow. We're funded to grow at a rate of 100 inmates per month, and the actual growth is about 170. So we're in a position where we have to rely on private beds because we don't have the luxury of hanging up a no vacancy sign. So I would characterize our relationship as built on current need, and much like a relationship of anyone that hires someone to do something which really is a core governmental function. Mm-hmm. So we need the beds, but my bureau and its staff oversees what goes on in private prisons to ensure that we're getting taxpayers getting what they pay for.
So, Katie, to expand on this, would you say that the relationship is competitive or cooperative or both?
I'd say it's both, actually. That's a fair question to ask. The fact of the matter is we have, kind of like what Ivan was touching on, we have 5,000 more inmates than we're currently funded for. And so we have to find room. And the fact is we're plumb out of room as far as state beds and state-run facilities. In fact, even within the state of Arizona, within the private prisons, they're plumb out of room. So we're having to go out of state, which is the worst case scenario. We don't want to be out of state. So it creates a very tenuous relationship. If we had it our way, we've proven that we've been able to do it faster, better, and cheaper as far as using state taxpayer dollars on state beds. It's just an ideological difference between the two entities.
Well, it's interesting because I went since they couldn't send anybody, I went to Management and Training Corporation's website, and they state that, this is a direct quote, private corrections delivers improved accountability, costs, quality, and outcomes. I would venture to guess that you might take issue with that. Any one of you? Caroline?
I would most certainly disagree. I have seen example after example of a range of chronic problems within privately operated facilities. From, you know, across the board with all of the private prison corporations, they tend to have the same kinds of problems. I see a higher rate of disturbances, escapes, riots like the one we recently had in Indiana. I see a lot more mismanagement, financial mismanagement, misdeeds and misconduct of guards, abuse of prisoners, and a lot of that traces back to some of the core problems with these facilities. And so, certainly any corporation in its PR is going to make the case for the product that they're attempting to sell. But I certainly think that there's plenty of evidence to the contrary.
You know, I would add to that too that running prisons is a challenge. Running prisons and somehow making a profit at it must be even more challenging. We were talking earlier, 96% of our inmate population is going to get out someday. We acknowledge that someday inmates are going to become our neighbors, their kids are going to go to school with our kids. Our director has instituted Parallel Universe and a lot of programs that are designed with that very fact in mind. How can we, as the state of Arizona, take a more proactive stance on returning someone to society that's more likely to be a productive citizen? You know, when we're in a position right now of having to rely on private prison beds, that challenge is made that much more difficult, trying to work through our private prison partners.
The other thing too is when it comes to the actual dollar amount and how much it's costing, we had an independent consulting firm come in and look at our data side by side with the private prison data, and over the course of the last 3 years we have spent $6 million plus extra dollars because we have been forced to go to privates to house these prisoners instead of putting them in state-run facilities. And this is an independent firm that has taken our numbers and their numbers, no vested interest, and come up with the data to prove it's not cost effective and the taxpayer ends up paying for it.
Well, that's a critical question. I think that's what every citizen wants to know is, are these prisons saving taxpayers any money? And according to the Management and Training Corporation, private prisons save them 11 to 17%. That's a direct quote. According to research studies, it doesn't say whose, but it does.
Right.
So all of you agree that that is not correct.
Well, I think it's, there's lies, damn lies in statistics, right? And a lot of this boils down to, are we doing an apples to apples comparison? AFSC actually, prior to the Maximus study, reviewed most of the existing documentation about cost comparison studies and found that in most cases they were comparing apples to oranges, right? So they were looking at very different populations of prisoners because, as we mentioned earlier, private prisons are very selective about who they take. And so they would apply these comparisons to an overall prison population versus the very selective, very easy to manage population. Say, bada bing, we've got this cost savings. Well, it would cost anyone less to house those particular prisoners. And then you're not even talking about the oversight costs of transporting people out of state in many cases with some of these provisional beds, of cleaning up the mess after there is some incident in these facilities, because private corporations don't have their own marshal's force or police officers or riot squads to go in when there are disturbances. So there are a whole lot of other costs that don't get factored into many of those analyses.
Well, and the other thing too, just to add to what Carolyn was saying, is last year we had 2 contracts canceled in Texas, and the provider came in and said, hey, we have someone who's willing to pay more per day per inmate than you are, so we're going to the highest payer. They give us 30 days notice, and in the course of that we had to bring back over 1,200 inmates total out of Texas last year into a system that was already overcrowded. Meanwhile, we had to spend precious time negotiating another potential contract to be able to put these inmates over there, knowing that they could do the exact same thing and turn around and give 30 days notice, and we'd have to take them back.
It was the sane operator in all of those cases. Am I right?
Yeah.
So they really do. They have us over something of a barrel in these instances, and it's very unfortunate. I think that there is such a sort of unquestioning belief in privatization as a better management method on the part of the legislature, because I really think that they're missing a lot of the clear evidence to the contrary.
Let's talk about that. How does this politically get so much traction? We know that there's a movement throughout the whole country, and there has been for the past several years, to privatize everything and to outsource everything. So if it's looked at in that regard, yes. But I mean, when you see that so many people are being sentenced and there's so little room for them, there's kind of a disconnect at the state legislatures, aren't there? That they're passing tougher laws, but they're not passing budgets to support the prison population that people that they're sending. Is that?
Well, legislature has a tough job to do, but certainly you can't argue that getting tough on crime is a popular stance to take, but it has a very real cost. Prisons, their infrastructure, much like roads and bridges and everything else, and you know, it's not a very popular, it's a very necessary but unpopular thing to put money into. When you take responsibility to incarcerate a person, all that goes with it, the medical care, you know, their clothing, their bedding, and all those kinds of things, it's expensive.
In fact, it ends up being about $58 on average a day per prisoner in our population. And when you're looking at over 36,000 prisoners, almost 36,500 today, that's a lot of money.
Now, are the for-profits spending that much per person? Because let's look at how effective they are. With a necessity to be responsible to the bottom line and to stockholders, what happens to the efficiency of these facilities? What happens to the prisoners' rights or prisoners'
In
quality?
general, I think you see the same sorts of patterns played out. The places where private facilities tend to cut corners is in staff pay and staff training, and in services and programming provided to the prisoners, right? So you talk about the meals being horrible, very few rehabilitative programming or other kinds of you know, drug treatment programs, things like that. Those are all very expensive, and they're seen as sort of superfluous, and so those are the things that get cut. And interestingly, when you look at some of the incidents then in these facilities, you can always trace that right back to that list of cost-cutting efforts, right? So if you look at the report that came out of the riot that our prisoners had in Indiana, it points right to the fact that they had high turnover rate among their guards, that they were not very well trained. Many of them didn't have a lot of experience and know how to handle a situation like that. And they also were cutting corners on the actual facilities. The doors and windows were not built to withstand an incident like that.
I actually, this is going to repeat some of what you just said, but made a list of things that this bottom line emphasis results in the conditions in prisons, and it's fewer, and you should correct me if any of these are incorrect from your standpoint, but fewer, if any, rehab programs leading to higher recidivism or higher return to prison, inexperienced low-paid staff who may be susceptible to bribery and corruption, high staff turnover, which you mentioned, and understaffing, substandard security, poor management, therefore unsafe prisons, inadequate health care, prison abuse is higher, and this one is astounding. The prisoners are treated differently in each facility, and maybe prisoners from different states. Ivan, could you, we talked about this briefly earlier, but when you transfer a prisoner out of state and he's standing, I'm going to say he's standing next to a prisoner from that state, they're both entitled to different quality of care or incarceration? Typically,
the privates will run a prison population in accordance with whatever the contract says. So in our case, those entities with which we contract, they're required to conform to Arizona rules and policies. Now, the extent to which their staff can do that has a lot to do with the quality of their management team, the seniority of their staff. We typically find young, inexperienced staff, and so there's a big learning curve there. And so, when you have inexperienced employees trying to deal with a prison population that's used to structure, rules, and a particular level of engagement, and it's not there, typically problems will result.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What about accountability and transparency in these facilities? Caroline, you've been doing research on this for a while, haven't you?
Yeah, it's very difficult to get information from these private operators, and the analysis, basically if you say you wanted to have a look at Bill Gates's tax filings for the past few years, these are private corporations. They don't have the same obligation to the citizens as a government entity does. So it makes it extremely difficult to get information. I mean, here in Arizona, we have seen a bill introduced for a number of years that has yet to pass that would simply require those private prisons that are operating in the state of Arizona without contracts with the state to tell us who is in their facilities. Right, so Corrections Corporation of America has a number of facilities in Florence where they take folks from Alaska, Hawaii, federal prisoners, immigrant detainees, and they have no obligation to tell the leadership of the state of Arizona, local law enforcement, or anyone else who's in their facilities, when they're coming and going, and what's going on in there. And that should be a concern to everyone.
Sure. How do these prisoners, for a layperson like me who doesn't understand how things work, it seems that it's counterproductive to take a prisoner and send him or her out of state, away from family and any support system that they might have. So how do these prisoners get chosen to go? Do they volunteer, or is it mandatory? Or I know I've read about some videos that were produced by some of these places, making it look kind of like a resort in the different prisons, so that they would sign up.
Oh, you're thinking of California.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, California did offer that. Here in Arizona, we don't have the laws on the books that say that they have to stay within the state. We can put them out of state. That being said, we don't like to. When you come back to that statistic that 96% are going back to their community, they do better when they're around friends and family, and they have a support system when they get out. Not only when they get out, but also while they're in. It gives them a chance to say, this is what's going on, this is what I'm working on, and to create those relationships. It's a lot more difficult to do when someone is in another state. It's proven that they have a much higher likelihood of coming back to us. It's not the way we like to operate, but until we have a legislature that says we'll give you the money to run the facility that you want to run, we're kind of hand-tied, so to speak. I mean, we just have to take these folks.
So let's go back to lawmakers again, because this is a political show, and let's go a little bit more in depth on how this happened. You mentioned the tough on crime stances, which are popular with voters, so it makes sense that politicians want to do this, and that there is a push to privatize. What about lobbying? Do these industries lobby?
Like you wouldn't
boy,
believe.
do these industries lobby. Yes, they most certainly do, and quite aggressively and rather successfully, I would say, judging by the actions of the state legislature. I think you do have a combination of factors. You have politicians who tend to be very conservative and are ideologically aligned with this idea that privatizing anything makes it automatically better, despite all evidence to the contrary. Then you have, these very slick, well-paid lobbyists that are swarming around the Capitol, especially when, budgets are being decided, when there's an overcrowding crisis to be taken advantage of. And it's actually been fairly well documented. An organization called FollowTheMoney.org, the Institute on Money and State Politics, actually has done a report on prison interests, court political players, and looked at Arizona specifically, and managed to pull the records of contributions made by lobbyists for the various private firms that either have contracts in Arizona or are bidding for contracts in Arizona. And it's quite impressive the way it broke down. Let's see, private prison interests gave $77,267 to Arizona candidates during the 2002 and 2004 election cycles. And perhaps unsurprisingly, Republicans receive nearly 90% of those contributions. And they actually have it broken down by key leadership in the state in terms of chairs of committees and whatnot. And it's pretty clear that those folks were receiving the largest contributions from various private companies.
Okay, so that might explain some of this. I mean, even Management and Training Corporation, I kind of smiled because under accountability as a business priority, the first thing they say is market forces play a major role in private prison accountability. I'm not quite sure how that fits. They go on to say that if the managers don't reach the specified outcomes, then they're replaced or something like that. But I mean, market forces seem to, that's a phrase that's very appealing to legislatures and to a lot of the electorate, I think. So,
well, MTC gave a total of $6,876 to Arizona candidates.
who did? MTC?
MTC did.
Okay.
Or lobbyists affiliated with MTC, I should say.
Ivan, what would you say is, we know that this is a problem. What is the biggest problem? Is it overcrowding facing the Arizona Department of Corrections?
Well, certainly that's what drives the need. We would rather have all of our inmates in state-run, state-built, state-operated facilities because we know that we control the quality of the programs and the services that are provided. The responsibility doesn't go away. Because those beds aren't there, we have to rely on the privates to some extent right now. We're hopeful, though, that the legislature will do something and give us more state-run facilities so that, especially so that the rehabilitative programs that are part of the parallel universe can be implemented across the board so that when those inmates do get out, they get out a more civil, responsible citizen instead of somebody that's just going to turn around and come right back to prison.
Sure.
And I want to go slightly off topic here, but I feel like I would be remiss if I did not say that a big piece of this is that our sentencing law in Arizona is overly harsh and completely out of step with the type of crime rates that we're seeing. Right, so we've got 60% of our prison population overall are convicted of nonviolent offenses, right? So we do not need to incarcerate people at the level that we are in Arizona. Arizona has the highest incarceration rate in the West, out of Western states.
The other side of that issue, Arizona is the first among all corrections departments to enter into an agreement with the federal government. We've got over 5,000 criminal aliens in our system, and we have staff that have been basically attached to ICE to work on getting those inmates through the system quicker, saving,
We're at well over $10 million now in savings to taxpayers, and that's just since 2005. Because if we can identify them when they come in, we can get them out as soon as we can, whereas before they would just sit in our system.
Sure.
I mean, that's the size of all of Lewis Prison, 5,000 inmates. That's a lot of criminal aliens in our system.
And if you're to think about, for example, the folks convicted of drug offenses, and the fact that treatment is much more effective than straight incarceration is, and much, much cheaper to do in the community without separating people from their families, it's a very obvious solution that we really need to take a look at.
Well, and it's like you said too, everyone wants to be tough on crime because it's popular. We always say in corrections you have to be tough and you have to be smart. If you want to be tough, you have to give the funding to the programs because the rehabilitation programs do work. You have to come in and fund it on the back end. Something that has been really tough on our department in the last year is we have a county attorney up in Maricopa who decided that all second-time felons, regardless of what the felony was, automatically come to prison. We have one county attorney who makes this decision, and as a result we're looking at how many hundreds of thousands of dollars that the rest of the state is going to have to pay for. If we had every county attorney do that in this state, our prison population would be even bigger than it is now by leaps and bounds. So yeah, does it look good to voters? All second-time felons should definitely go to prison. Yeah, but let's think about it. First of all, you're going to have to pay for it, and second of all, is there a way we can do it better, that's smarter? And those aren't the questions that are being asked, unfortunately.
Let me ask you this as we're winding down here and running out of time. What does this say about us as a society that we have such high incarceration rates? I mean, compared to every other industrialized nation, I mean, what does it say about us morally that we are willing to allow money to be made off of prisoners in these private facilities. I understand this could be a whole other half hour
Yeah, you got another
discussion
show lined up
as
for
opposed
this?
to a few more minutes, but do you want to each take a crack at that?
Well, clearly, I think that it's profoundly disturbing, and I think that it points to a real cultural shift in this country that's happened over the last few years of really giving up on individuals and saying that people can't change, they can't be rehabilitated, this whole idea of good guys and bad guys, and really not looking at individual cases or what works, what makes sense, what's effective. And we're paying for it now, and we're going to continue to pay for it.
30 seconds each.
I would just qualify that concern by saying that, having been in this business for 20 years, the glimmer of light that's on the horizon is I've never seen such an emphasis in the Arizona Department of Corrections towards practicing on the inside what really works on the outside. So it's tougher to do in the private prisons, but I've never seen such an emphasis on putting us out of business, working hard to put ourselves out of business and keep the public safe.
More than anything, it just comes down, are you going to go for profit or are you going to go for people? We're in the business of making people. We don't care about profit. Ivan and I aren't getting a kickback at Christmas, let me tell you. It just comes down to the difference. Are you going to return the money to the shareholders or are you going to give the taxpayers what they've paid for?
Very good. Thank you both, all three of you, so much. And I do want to recommend some books to everyone who's watching. The Prison and the Gallows, The Politics of Mass Incarceration in America by Marie Gottschalk. And the second book is Prisons, Inc., A Convict Exposes Life Inside a Private Prison by K.C. Carceral. We also have a couple websites for you. The American Friends Service Committee, www.afsc.org/AZ, and the Arizona Department of Corrections website is www.azcorrections.gov. And finally, we have a quote from Eric Schlosser, the award-winning journalist and author of Fast Food Nation. The lure of big money is corrupting the nation's criminal justice system, replacing notions of safety and public service with a drive for higher profits. Thanks so much for being with us today. So much.
Thank you for having us.
It goes by fast, doesn't it?
It goes by very fast.
Too fast.
Yeah.
We often